Hey everybody, welcome back. Hopefully you guys had a good spring break. This is going to be the video for April 14th. Please remember our new format. You're going to start a brand new sheet of paper. You're going to title it with the date, and then you guys are going to send me a picture through that Google Doc that I assign you in classwork. You guys will show me your notes and your practice or homework problems, and then that's how you guys will be getting your participation points. I will be giving you guys the answers the following day by around like 8 a.m. Once I post those, you can't really get full credit for participation anymore because I'll also have the answers for the homework. You get half credit if you do it past then. So I'm gonna try to make my due dates or my due times as 7 a.m. the next day. So the notes for April 14th need to be uploaded and submitted to me through that Google Doc by 7 a.m. on April 15th the next day, because then I will go ahead and post the answers to the homework and you guys can double check whether you guys are doing well or not well. And obviously if you're missing a lot, you need to contact me. It's going to be quite hard for me to go through 130 something students answers every day. I'm just going to kind of check for participation. I won't be able to check every single problem on homework, so that is your job. But again, if you guys need anything, you got to reach out to me because I'm obviously here to help you. Okay guys, so we're going to jump into it. So what we're going to do today is actually some review concepts from geometry. This is called a right triangle. Remember that if you have that little box, that represents 90 degrees or a right angle. And there's two different types of math we can do with right triangles. The first thing is if they talk about all three sides. If they talk about all three sides of a triangle, then these guys don't have a special name at all. The side across from your 90 degrees is always called the hypotenuse. Now, to spell it out would be okay. Usually I just say HYP for height. But then the other two sides, they don't have special names. They're just called legs of the right triangle. Now, whenever we have that information right there, so we know about the three sides of a right triangle are labeled, then we need to know that the Pythagorean theorem would be used to set up an equation. So in the Pythagorean theorem would simply be you take one of the legs squared plus you take the other leg squared equals the hypotenuse squared. So you guys, you can set up an equation if you know, or the three, you don't have to know them, they could be variables, but if the three sides of a right triangle are labeled. But now, what happens whenever we don't have the three sides of a right triangle labeled? Well, then we have to do a thing called right triangle trig, which is short for trigonometry. Okay, so you guys, we want to make sure that we know the three basic trig functions. So the first thing that you should write down on your paper after the Pythagorean theorem can be used, remember, anything that goes on the board needs to go in your notes for full participation. But the trig functions that we need to know, and I'll actually write out how to spell them first, is sine, S-I-N-E, cosine, C-O-S-I-N-E, and then tangent, T-A-N-G-E-N-T. Those are our three trig functions. Now, it should be a review on how to work with these, but hopefully this will kind of have everything come back to you. Maybe you weren't the greatest at this at geometry, and you're going to get a lot better now. There's a mnemonic device to remember these. So you should remember it as so, ka, toa. Now, whenever you remember that as a mnemonic device, they actually set up full equations. So I'm not really keen on just knowing SOHCAHTOA, because if you just go by the letters, you would think sine opposite hypotenuse. Well, there's a lot more to that equation than that. So make sure that even though you remember it as SOHCAHTOA, you have a true understanding of what is going on. And the equations would be, SO stands for sine. Now we abbreviate sine as S-I-N, but what has to follow a trig function is an angle. So after sine, you have to put an angle behind it, and that equals a ratio or a fraction of these two words. The O represents the opposite side for the right triangle, and H represents the hypotenuse. So same thing here about the angles following a trig function. Cosine, we abbreviate it COS. An angle has to follow it, and it equals a ratio as well, or a fraction. A represents the adjacent side for the right triangle. H represents the hypotenuse. And finally, TOA represents tangent, abbreviated TAN. An angle has to follow a trig function, so its tangent of an angle is equal to a ratio or a fraction, the ratio of the opposite side divided by the adjacent side. So now that we're kind of coming up with these new terms, well, we know what a hypotenuse is, so hopefully we can use that from the Pythagorean theorem information. But before, we just called the two other sides of a right triangle legs. So which one is the opposite side and which one is the adjacent side? And honestly, we don't know unless you know what angle we are focusing on. So you guys, the next thing that you want to know is how to label right triangles for trig. So how do we label the sides? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the two of the same triangle, but we're going to see that we're going to label them quite differently. So there's my right angle, and I'll finish it off with a triangle. Now what I'll do is I'll try to draw the same triangle over here. So I've tried my best to make two of the same triangle. Now, what you want to be able to do is make sure you know which sides are the adjacent side, opposite side, hypotenuse in each triangle, and you're going to see that two of them are going to switch places because it's going to depend on which angle or what angle is given to you. So we're going to focus on this being our angle. Now, a lot of times they use a Greek letter theta. It looks like a zero, kind of with a line through it. So you guys, theta is actually a variable, but it's going to represent our angle. Well, here's how you label a triangle. Across from the 90 degrees is called the hypotenuse. Then when you look at the angle that you are given and you travel across from the angle that you are given is called the opposite side. And then the third remaining side, or the leg that touches your angle, is called the adjacent side. Now, when you look at these two triangles, if they're the same, you would think, oh, so that's just how you always label them. Well, what if we were focusing on a different angle? So instead of focusing on the angle in the bottom left-hand corner, we're going to focus on the angle in the upper right-hand corner. Again, I'm going to call it theta. Theta is just a Greek letter, so it is a variable. But what we're going to do is we're going to label this triangle. Well, across from the 90 is the height. Across from the angle that you are given or we are focusing on is the opposite side. And then the third remaining side, or the leg that touches the angle, is called the adjacent side. So in order to do right triangle trig, you need to be able to label triangles correctly. So what we're going to do is, in our notes here now, we're going to finish up by having 4 triangles drawn for us, and we're going to set up an equation. Now, the equations are going to come from either Pythagorean theorem or right triangle trig, and you'll have to make that decision. So here is your first triangle that we're going to try to set up an equation for. I'll give you a right triangle. Now, they are not drawn to scale at all on the homework or anything. And I'm going to give you some information about it. I'm going to put an X here, a 10 here, and 50 degrees there. Well, the first thing that you need to realize is Pythagorean theorem is off the table because an angle is going to be focused on, and we don't know anything about that third side. So now I'm thinking right triangle trig, and I would go through my little mnemonic device, SOHCAHTOA. Well, in order to know which one you would use out of SOHCAHTOA, you would first label the sides. So across from the 90 is the height. Across from the angle that you are given is the opposite side, and the last remaining side is the adjacent side. So once you label all 3 of them, you can scribble out the side that has nothing written on it. The adjacent side is blank, so I'm not going to use that side for my right triangle trig. And then hopefully you, after you did SOHCAHTOA, you'd realize if you have the H and the O, it is the sine trig function. So you set it up as sine, now I write cursive, but it's S-I-N, sine of the angle. The angle is 50 degrees, and that would equal a ratio or a fraction, and you put the opposite side, which is the variable x, divided by the hypotenuse, 10, and you set up the equation. All we're gonna do for homework today is set up equations. We will solve them throughout the week, but just set them up today. All right, number 2. I can draw this triangle for you. Please remember, triangles will not be drawn to scale, but there will be a right angle somewhere. So we have our right angle there. I'm going to give you this information. Well, the first thing I notice is there's no angle referenced at all, whether it's a variable or a given angle, and the 3 sides of a right triangle are labeled. Now, we don't know them all because we have a variable, but we can set up Pythagorean theorem. So you guys, the only key one there is x. Across from the 90 is the height, and the other 2 are legs. So to set up this equation, I would take a leg squared plus the other leg squared equals the hypotenuse squared. We're not going to solve the equations, we're just setting them up. Let's try number 3. Number 3, we have this triangle drawn for us. I have a 14 here. I have theta there. Now, theta is just a variable, it's not a big deal, and 11 there. Well, since there is an angle that we're talking about, it doesn't always have to be a number like number 1, it could be a variable, but since an angle is talked about, I think I need to think about trig. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to label the sides of the triangle. Across from the 90 is the height. Across from the angle that you're given is the opposite side, and the third remaining side is the adjacent. After I have all the sides labeled, I scribble out the side that does not have any information on it. The opposite side is blank, so I'm not going to use that in this model. And the equation I can set up if I have the adjacent side and the hypotenuse side comes from the CAH or CAH, C-A-H. So I set up cosine. Again, I write cursive. So cosine of the angle, an angle has to follow a trig function. In this one, it's a variable theta. It's like 0 with the slash through it, or like a straight line or a squiggle line through it, equals a ratio, and it's the adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse side. Now again, all we're doing is setting up equations today. We'll solve throughout the week. Your last one for notes is number 4. We're going to have a triangle that is drawn very similar to the last triangle. Just because the triangle looks the same, or well, maybe flipped or reversed, doesn't really mean anything. You got to look at the information given. And we're going to have 34 degrees right here. We're going to have 7 there and 9 there. Well, since an angle is talked about or referenced, we don't do Pythagorean theorem. We do right triangle trig. So I label my sides. Across from the 90 is the height. Across from the angle that is given is the opposite side, and the third remaining side is the adjacent side. So when I look at that, I scribble out the side that is not labeled at all or has no information, which is the hypotenuse. And I think about what trig function uses those 2 sides. So again, please remember at any time in notes, you can pause to kind of catch up and write things, or you can pause to see if you can think of the next thing that I'm going to say, but tangent would be used. So I set up tangent. An angle has to follow a trig function, so of 34 degrees is equal to a fraction. Ooh, and actually I should have made one of those a variable. It looks like 7 was supposed to be a variable. Sorry about that. So I'll put an x right there. So you can go ahead and erase 7 and put an x. So then we put our opposite side over our adjacent side, x over 9. All right, you guys, so that right there is right triangle trig along with Pythagorean theorem. Now what I'm going to do is try something a little bit different. I'm going to scoot really close to the screen with my piece of paper, and you guys are going to try these next 4 problems for homework. Please remember to start a new sheet of paper every day, label by the date, Put all your notes and your homework on that sheet, and then you guys are gonna upload that to the Google Doc that I give you. After I show the homework, you guys, I'm gonna turn the video off, so make sure you pause it and you write down these problems and try them out. But it's your boy, Mr. P. Have a great day. Hope you're staying happy and healthy. All right, here are the homework problems. Let's see if it'll zoom for you. There you go. So you're gonna set up the equations for those 4 problems right there. Copy down the triangles, set up the equations, and you'll be done with homework.